Be sure to go to flipsidegaming.com and use promo code 6 for 10% off on orders over $10. Do the same at the Grizzly Gentleman. Both of them are fantastic deals and help support the show. What is up, Planeswalkers? Third 6 with another installment of the D&T Primer. So as new sets come out, I'm essentially going to continue the Primer series by talking about some of the cards that could see use in Death and Taxes on Historic. So this one, I'm looking at Kaladesh Remastered. I went through the Kaladesh Remastered list on Arena's website, and then I moved it over to Scryfall because this is just the thing that I prefer. Yeah, we're just going to talk about some things. Only one white card this time, very interestingly. I didn't really see anything that I was enthused about. By the way, the volume may be fudged because I messed with my sound mixer earlier when I was watching event coverage on Twitch while I was supposed to be listening to something else. Anyway, Authority of the Consuls is a very interesting sideboard card for white, especially if we really need help against haste-based aggressive decks, which may become more of a thing once we get into Kaladesh because we have things like Bomat Courier. That said, we already do have Kinjali Sunwing. We have ways of gaining life in general, so I'm not entirely sure that Authority of the Consuls is going to be necessary, but it is definitely an option that you can use, and because it's a 1-mana card, the fact that it's not a creature doesn't matter all that much. It also means that you, like, if you're on the play, say you just lost, you could potentially get this down before even their turn 1 card, so. Next up is Trophy Mage. So, there's, I've described before, the idea of like an Enlightened Tutor sideboard, where you have Enlightened Tutor plus a package of artifacts and enchantments that you can bring in during sideboard games and use the tutor to get those cards as if you have more versions of those cards. You can theoretically do something similar with Karn the Great Creator. I think I touched on that when I was talking about CMC4, but I'm not entirely sure. But it's a potential option. The main issue is that currently we don't have a good way of getting enchantments, and enchantments are some of our best cards. For what it's worth, we have plenty of artifacts as well. The thing about Trophy Mage specifically is that she only gets artifacts with CMC 3, exactly 3. If we were to get something like Trinisphere, maybe Ensnaring Bridge, the issue with that is, of course, then we would have an issue attacking. You know, they're just, I don't think, there aren't too many good, specifically 3 CMC artifacts that we're looking to utilize, even especially in the sideboard. So, Trophy Mage is definitely one of those cards that has potential as more cards enter the historic card pool, but for now, I just do not think that she has the sufficient targets. Fatal Push, in the black version of the deck, may be good enough to dethrone, what the heck is that card's name? Bloodchief's Thirst. Maybe. And the reason I say maybe is, one, this is instant. That's fantastic. And this does allow you to scale that up if something of yours goes away. Not going to be too hard to do in a Death and Taxes deck. You know, you have plenty of small things. Things die all the time. The main issue that I can see occurring is that Death and Taxes tends to have trouble with a bit larger creatures, although, is it larger CMC necessarily? Like, what are, like, the big creatures that this won't hit ever, right? It's just 5 drops and above. So obviously there's things like Ulamog and stuff. Yeah, Ulamog. We'll get an Ulamog, just need to stop. There are obviously those cards. However, like, you couldn't deal with Ulamog with Bloodchief's Thirst anyway. The reason I'm still giving an edge to Bloodchief's Thirst is the fact that it scales better. It costs you more. It does cost you more in a deck that tends to prefer not having things cost a ton. But it can hit Planeswalkers, which is nice. Although, we're playing a Taxes deck. Their Planeswalkers shouldn't be able to run away with the game. This is definitely one I'm going to have to try out more. I think, honestly, for my Bolas control deck, I'm going to try this out. However, I do think I'm going to stick with Bloodchief's Thirst long-term, because I think Bloodchief's Thirst scales a lot better. in specifically Grixis control. However, Fatal Push might be better in more aggressive mid-range and or tempo decks. So Death and Taxes, falls somewhere within those lines, I guess. Glint-sleeve Siphoner is kind of just an interesting card. The main reason this card is decent is because it does an okay Bob impression. It's likely the only card that is going to have energy associated with it in a D&T deck, but that's actually entirely fine. When it enters a battlefield, you get an energy, and then on attack, you can get energy. It does need to live in order for you to get that initial payout, but even just like an every 2 turns, get some good stuff is nice. The main difficulty I think this card is going to have is just, 2-drop slot crowding. It has Menace, which is nice. It allows you to hit through to Planeswalkers, for example, relatively easily. But, Death and Taxes is very much known for having relatively weak toughness creatures, and this just adds to that fragility, and I'm not sure if the fragility for this card specifically is worth the potential boon that it might bring. As I said during my long run of the D&T videos, these videos are meant to be as comprehensive as possible, while still being relatively realistic. So, I can see a world in which Glint-sleeve Siphoner is playable, even though I did kind of spend most of the time discussing it to be negative. But I'm not going to talk about, Renowned Weaponsmith or whatever the heck it's called. Yahenni, Undying Partisan. Now, you might be asking, for what it's worth, I don't actually remember if I talked about Wolf Strider, but regardless. But if I didn't, or even if I did, I probably didn't give it a great score. But regardless, you might be asking, why is Yahenni different from Wolf Strider? The first thing is it has haste. That is not for nothing. That's not garbo. Being able to surprise hit something like a Planeswalker, or, essentially have burst damage, is quite nice to see. Additionally, the scry is obviously quite nice with Wolf Strider. But if we're not taking advantage of our creatures dying, we don't necessarily care about it. It can come back, it has better starting stats, but Yahenni gets larger as your opponent's things die. So, it scales nicely against more aggressive strategies. But 2, its sacrifice ability is arguably better in both aggressive and control matchups, because of the fact that against aggro, you can double block something where if one of them is a chump block, you can sack that chump block to allow Yahenni to be indestructible, to kill one of her opponent's creatures. That will in turn make Yahenni bigger, so that on the following block, she can block something and hopefully kill something even bigger, and that cycle will continue. Against control, the reason she's better than Wolf Strider is, sure, the scry off of Wolf Strider is nice, but being able to have something that sticks around after a board wipe is something that I've talked about throughout this series that is very, very helpful for Death and Taxes, because they're a bunch of small creatures and they fold hard to board wipes. Being able to have Yahenni out and say, well, I'm going to lose all of my creatures, except I at least get Yahenni. And Yahenni's not necessarily a powerhouse. You're not saving a 5/4 indestructible creature. You're probably just going to be saving a 2/2 or a 3/3. But the difference between having that creature out and not having it can be the difference between you winning or you losing against control. Then we get to the point of a lot of good 3-drops in Death and Taxes, and black already has a decent number of ways to be resilient, so I'm not entirely sure if Yahenni is going to be needed in that version. That said, she is an option, she is a tool. She also is a Bedbar. Chandra, Torture Defiance. What are you talking about, Justin? Why is this here? Yes, this is a Planeswalker, but it is a decent Planeswalker if you are trying to build a bigger red Taxes deck. First things first, coming out at a 4 mana is not terrible. That's kind of where we want our Planeswalkers to be. 3 or 4 mana if we're playing Planeswalkers, which is not going to always be the case. You get pseudo card advantage that still hurts your opponent. If you need to get something, you can use her first +1 in order to get something off the top. If you don't use that, or it's a land because it's cast, you can't play that card, then you get to dome your opponent. That's nice. We like doing that. We have to kill our opponent eventually. Her second ability allows us to essentially get a rebate on Chandra the first turn she comes out, or accelerate into playing two things in a turn. And the reason I say two things in a turn is because even if you are a larger white-red Death and Taxes deck, you are still likely going to be running the majority of your creatures around 3 CMC. But being able to go, even if you miss a land drop from 4, being able to go in the following turn on turn 5 and play 2 3-drops, right, can be very helpful. If you're able to get a 3-drop and a 4-drop, say you're playing, you play Rekindling Phoenix plus a Rampaging Frostodon, right? Those are both fantastic cards. They add to your board very nicely. Your opponent can't gain any life. If they're a creature deck and they play creatures, they're going to actually lose some life. And you have a very resilient attacker and blocker against your opponent. The -3 is very helpful, right? It is just decent removal. It's not the best removal. It essentially is just a lightning strike, not a lightning strike. What is it? Lightning rebuke or whatever it is. But still, that is a nice utility option, which is what we want to see on our Planeswalkers. We want to see some way of gaining potential card advantage, or having, like, removal utility, mostly. The ultimate, for what it's worth, if we get to it, is just game-winning. Being able to, just on your, like, dinky, you know, you're playing your top decking and playing your Ailsids late game. You're playing your, even your Thalias. Like, once you get to a certain point, Thalia has become kind of ineffective. So being able to just be like, all right, I'm going to cast my Thalia. It does not matter if this card resolves. I'm casting my Thalia. I'm going to yeet that creature that is, like, threatening me. I'm going to dome your opponent, dome your Nissa, right? Your Nissa now is within attack range of my flyer. I'm going to hit you for 5 damage, a fourth of your health, right? Those are all very important things, and that's why I think that Chandra has at least potential in a larger Boros Taxes deck. Dovan Bond looks very similar to Chandra, except in the white-blue version. Now, I've said before, like, my primary Azorius version of Death and Taxes is one that abuses a lot of the blinks, the ETBs, effects, and whatnot, because we have access to cards that actually care about it. I have talked about a little bit a more normal-looking control deck that happens to use a lot of tax elements, and this card is one of those cards which could help that. We've already seen Dovan Hand of Control be mentioned because of the fact that you can essentially force a permanent. I think Dovan can hit any permanent. Just, like, negate the damage of that. But what's nice about Dovan here, this Dovan, is you have kind of that negation, but also you get to force activated abilities not to be activated. It's unfortunate that this is only on creatures, so you can't hit a permanent. Being able to hit a Planeswalker here would actually be nuts great. But you can target something like a Golos, right? And you can target something like a what is her name? The Rakdos DJ girl. You all know who I'm talking about, right? You can target those things and make it so they're not going to be able to get the utility out of their ability until your turn. Sure, they can still do it on your turn, but it might be less effective if they're doing it on your turn. Or if you have Tithe Taker out, right? Tithe Taker doesn't just affect spells; it affects abilities as well. So now, if they want to activate their Priest of Forgotten Gods, that's the card I was thinking about, by the way. You activate this. Let's say, for what it's worth, like they play it, then you have Dovan Bond, and you hit it. So they didn't have a chance to use it in response. So on their turn, they can't use it. On your turn, now they can use it, but they have the issue of having to pay that additional 1, and they're going to get mana in potentially a phase where they're not going to be able to use it, right? So I definitely like Dovan's plus here. The -1, you gain 2 life, you draw a card. As I've said, if we're playing the Planeswalkers, we need some way to get some sort of card advantage, and Dovan Bond potentially does that. The issue, of course, is, you know, he only starts out at 3 loyalty, relatively easy to die. But, you know, we're playing creatures, we can potentially protect them, and his +1 does go a decent way of protecting him. Very similar to the Chandra ultimate. If this dude ultimates, you probably win the game. Against control, you almost certainly do. Against... I'm just realizing this doesn't say lands, this is permanents. Yeah, no, I mean, if you get to ultimate this card, which is not going to be super easy, Chandra is a much easier, because she has 2 pluses instead of just 1 that you can choose from. But yeah, if you get to ultimate with Dovan, you are peachy keen. Kambal. Kambal is just like a fantastic Death and Taxes card. You put this into the Orzhov Taxes deck. Your opponents who are playing control, like this essentially is a beefier version of not Riot Control. The Gruul enchantment. You all know what I'm talking about. I don't need to remember any Magic the Gathering card. But yeah, no, this is a bit of a beefier version. In fact, I think the thing. No, I think it's a non-creature for that. I hate that I can see it in my head. It's like Lasher. I don't know. Regardless, it's a 2/3, which is great. They lose 2 and you gain 2. So this doesn't just hurt control decks. This hurts burn decks. If your opponent is over here trying to burn your face, they have to A, either kill this first, or B, somehow deal so much more burn than they otherwise would need to. I have no idea what's happening with my chair. My armrests are nonsense. Regardless, this card is very nice. The issue, obviously, is that this competes with the 3-drop slot. Let's see, whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's just great. The fact that it drains, not like it doesn't just deal damage to them, it drains, and that is so helpful. Mostly it just means that you can main deck this card, right? This doesn't have to be a sideboard card against control. You can just have this against aggro and have some incidental life gain when they play some random stuff. Just fantastic card. Yeah, I expect to play this in some Orzhov builds. Renegade Rallier is a good card. Obviously, the ever-present issue, we got a lot of good 3s, right? We have a lot of good 3s. This competes with them, but with this card, you see it, you look at it, you're like, this is kind of a bad card, Justin. What are you talking about? That's a 3-mana 3/2 that does nothing unless something leaves. And, you know, we don't have fetch lands in Historic, so you can't expect us necessarily to always get something. Collecting Company. Because our cards... So right now in green, I'm not using Coco. I don't think. And the reason for that is because there are plenty of 4s that I want to use. Yasharn comes to mind. Saheeli comes to mind. You know, we have these 4 CMC cards that are very helpful. Did I say Saheeli? I meant Shalai. Whatever. We have these 4 CMC cards that are very, very helpful. And so I've been using those. I've also been using things like Tristani, because Tristani can be retrieved off of the 2/3 Vigilance guy, Militia Bugler. All right, we can get that from that as well. So being able to hold up your collected companies, and if your opponent like just wipes the board, or even just single target removes a creature, hitting this and getting 3 cards off of your collected company instead of just 2 can be just destructive, utterly destructive. And the thing is, you don't even have to necessarily have that situation in mind. You can literally just attack. You know, maybe you don't have the best of attacks. You know, you can either trade nicely, or maybe your opponent's just not going to block one of your creatures. You can attack with like a Thalia. You attack in, maybe they kill your Thalia. You're like, haha, I'm going to play this card. I'm going to get my Thalia back. Right now, you've been able to get value out of an attack that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to do, right? Just really like this card. Really like the value that this card brings. Oh, another thing. Both Ailsid as well as Sack Dog. I don't remember the dog's name. All right. Both of those cards go to the graveyard when you use them, right? You can use those cards and get them back the same turn with Renegade Rallier. So that's just another aspect, another card combination that you should keep in mind when you think about building your green-white Death and Taxes decks. Now we're to the artifact. Yeah, I said artifact. There's only one that I can really consider, and that's Hope of Gearper. It's a legendary, which is not great. It's a 1-mana 1/1, which is not the best. It does fly, which is nice, and then you can sacrifice it until your next turn. Target player who was dealt combat damage by Hope of Gearper can't cast non-creature spells. This can theoretically shut down combo decks. It can theoretically shut down control decks for a turn, potentially giving you enough time to lethal them. I feel like the hoops are a little too difficult. The situations, the scenarios in which you'll be able to effectively use this card, I think is a little bit too slim, at least for now. Could be different in the future, but yeah, it has potential. I just don't see it right now. And the last 2 things are just 2 lands. This is a really short video. 20 minutes, really short video. I thought this was going to be shorter. We have Concealed Courtyard and Inspiring Vantage. They're helpful cards in a Death and Taxes deck because, as I said, the majority of our creatures, the majority of our cards really, are 3 CMC and below. So being able to play these untapped up to that 3 mana mark is absolutely fine. Hopefully we'll get the Seachrome Coast and Razorverge Thicket soon-ish. I kind of thought they would put them in Kaladesh Remastered, but apparently not. Apparently Wizards hates us. But yeah, so that was this video. I hope you enjoyed my Death and Taxes series so far. I still do plan on posting a deck list version, but I am a grad student. My time is fleeting. Anyway, I'd like to thank my lovely patrons, especially Fogwin and Malik, for the continued support. If you'd like to join them and support the show, you'll find links in the description below. I do, of course, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and of course, until next time, all will be one.